1X Developer Podcast.
All right, welcome to the 10X Developer Podcast.
I'm Brendan.
I'm Collin.
We're going to talk about, did you say 10X Developer?
Yeah. As opposed to what?
1X Developer.
Oh, the name of the show, yeah. Yeah, we're talking about the 10X Developer. Well, a lot of people have been asking me, I tell them about my podcast, and they say things like, what is a 10X developer? What is a 1X developer? Who are you and why are you in my house? And I think it's time to address some of these things.
That was the first question I got too. When I told people the name of the podcast, these are people who are not in the software development community. They were like, I think 1X developer is a reference to something that I'm not getting. And I had to kind of explain, there's this concept of a 10X developer that has kind of been floating around for a lot of years.
But once I explain it, they're like, oh, that's a good name.
Yeah, I agree.
Also, something I noticed, I was looking at my YouTube sub box, and, 1X Developer Podcast is like right at the very top because it's alphanumeric, right? So, I didn't even think about that, but we're right at the top of the list.
I didn't either. That's awesome. That's like the guys who named their company AAA Plumbing just to be the top of the phone book.
Yeah. Okay, so a little bit of history about the 10X developer. The first reference I was familiar with was from the book The Mythical Man Month by Frederick P. Brooks Jr., which is kind of a classic, right?
Yeah.
This is one that people talk about a lot in software. I'd say overall it's pretty good. I honestly haven't read the whole thing, but I've read parts of it, specifically the Mythical Man Month section, which is about how there's just not this direct relationship between number of developers and time to finish a project like managers a lot of the time seem to think. That's a good one. But what we're interested in is in chapter 3, there's I'm just going to read this little paragraph here. Programming managers have long recognized wide productivity variations between good programmers and poor ones. But the actual measured magnitudes have astounded all of us. In one of their studies, Sackman, Erickson, and Grant were measuring performances of a group of experienced programmers. Within just this group, the ratios between best and worst performances averaged about 10 to 1 on productivity measurements and an amazing 5 to 1 on program speed and space measurements. In short, the $20,000 a year programmer may well be 10 times as productive as the $10,000 a year one. The converse may be true too. Also, I gotta say, for any listeners, maybe if you're not in the U.S., that's okay. But if you live in the U.S. and you're a programmer and you're making $20,000 a year, I think you should probably dust up the resume a little bit. This was the 1980s, I think this was written. Still, though, that sounds low, right?
I think those are just examples. I think minimum wage, even back then, gets you more than $20,000 a year, right?
Yeah, maybe they're thinking more like contractor, right? Like, it's $20,000 a year, but it's like a 3-month contract or something. Oh, so it's $20,000. Yeah, I don't know.
I guess I assumed that he was just saying for double the salary, you're getting 5 times or 10 times as much work out of the person. So 10 and 20 are just easy numbers to work with.
But why didn't he just go with 2 and 1?
That's true.
Anyway, the data showed no correlation whatsoever between experience and performance. I doubt if that is universally true, he says in parentheses. I wonder why. I don't wonder why, but I wonder if there's a study about that.
Yeah.
Anyway, that's, I think, at least the proliferation of the concept of the 10X developer. I don't think he actually uses that phrase in here, 10X developer, but this is the first I am aware of someone talking about developers being 10 times better than other developers.
And that became kind of a thing for, hiring managers would say, oh, I'm looking for that 10X developer, right? They're looking for that developer that for the same amount of money or a little bit more money, you can get 10 times performance out of. That's the idea, is that there are some people who are, not because of their skills necessarily, but like the way that they work, right?
Yeah.
It's not that I guess it is that they know so much about programming languages, but yeah, they are so much more productive than the person who is getting paid the same or a little bit less than them.
Yeah. And so I would say at this point, the concept of the 10x developer is almost a little bit of a meme. I think, I'm sure there are people who believe that it's true, but it seems like most people kind of don't really vibe with the idea of the 10x developer. I think a lot of people feel like it's kind of a toxic idea. Do you feel that way?
Yes. Yeah, I think so. First of all, let's talk about when exactly this was written. So this is 1986?
I think 1986, yeah.
And so he's citing a study about software development in 1986, and I think that needs to be a big caveat to the whole discussion, right? Is
absolutely, yeah.
Software development has changed enormously since then. And so, I wonder, I don't know if he says when those studies that he's citing are from, but...
He does. The study was from 1968.
See, so that's a big part of it. I don't think that we can glean all that much about software development practices today from a study from the 60s about software development.
The challenges were different. The economics was different. Yeah.
I mean, that's before the age of the personal computer, before like you could learn to program in your house by yourself and then go to a job and do it. You really had to go to school and do it in like an academic setting.
So, and that's actually, so I found the study that he references, and that was actually the primary thesis of the study was comparing online debuggers versus offline debuggers, which I don't even really know what that means.
I don't either.
But kind of a side effect of the study was that they found there's just a huge variation between the individuals and their individual test subjects. I don't want to dive right into it too much because I feel like when you actually read the study, it's like a bombshell on the whole thing. But I kind of want to talk a little bit about. Well, okay. So when do you think the phrase "rockstar developer" came about?
I feel like that was kind of an early 2000s thing, maybe.
Yeah. Do you think that was like hiring managers trying to like rebrand the 10x developer?
Yeah, kind of. I think there have been a lot of iterations on that. Rockstar, Ninja.
Oh, Ninja, yeah.
These are all variations on like, you're looking for the diamond in the rough. You're right, you're looking for the one who's just like so much better than everyone else.
Yeah. And it's weird because like, well, it's weird for a number of reasons, but well, okay, first of all, do you think that there are 10x developers? Because to play devil's advocate a little bit, like I look at someone like John Carmack and I'm like, yeah, that guy's 100 times more productive than me in a day.
I think there might be, well, okay. Putting aside like outliers for a minute, because I do think there are a handful of outliers in the world who are, yes, much, much, much more productive than other people. I don't think hiring managers are going to find those people very often. Right. You know what I mean? So, yes, I do think that there are 10x developers in the world. I think for the average company that's like putting out a call to hire programmers who have all come out of boot camps or come out of school or wherever they're coming from, I think 10x is an exaggeration. I think there are better and worse programmers for sure, just like any profession. But I think 10x is an exaggeration, and we really shouldn't be looking for that. I think that part of it comes from, there's this thing in software development that's like the myth of like the lone genius, like Carmack, right?
Yeah.
I mean, he really was one of those, but like I think Zuckerberg at one point was kind of seen as one of those, like he just wrote this thing all by himself. And yeah, I think that's kind of glorified in the tech industry. I don't know if that makes you a 10x developer. You know what I mean? Yeah. A lot of it is like right place, right time. A lot of it is business skill. It has nothing to do with programming.
Well, so that's something I definitely want to get into is like, what is the metric, right, when you say 10x?
Yeah.
Because, you mentioned Mark Zuckerberg. If you're looking at the metric of financial success, yeah, I mean, he's a billion X developer, right? But that's not, is that even reproducible, what he did? Is that something you can find? And the really interesting thing is, like, to be that financially successful isn't necessarily, like, correlated to skill, right?
Right.
I imagine he's probably really great. I've never, like, seen his code or whatever, but another guy with equal programming skill, could he also have made Facebook and become Mark Zuckerberg? Who knows? Yeah.
That's what I mean about right place, right time. I think there are some extremely skilled programmers who've made some great products that just, like, weren't in the right place at the right time, and they just languished in the graveyard of web apps because people weren't ready for it, or they didn't have the ability to market it right, or anything like that.
Yeah. So I think the big thing that comes up with the concept of the 10x developer is a lot of developers feel like it's kind of unhealthy, right? Because it's like we're all... Sometimes as a developer, it seems like you're expected to, like, not just be good at your job, but to, like, embody this, right? Like, you're supposed to be someone who is constantly learning on the job and off the job, and is this like computer freak, right? That kind of what you were mentioning. And I kind of have mixed feelings about that. I mean, we should be accepting of people who want to just come in, do a job, and that's it. But I also think, like, we should push ourselves to be as good as we can be, right?
Yeah. True.
So I think that's something I worry about sometimes with the name 1X Developer Podcast. Like, I don't want us to come off as, like, oh, it's okay to suck. You know what I mean? Like, I don't want to be, like, pro bad programming or, like, pro being mediocre. You know what I mean? Like, and I think if you've been listening to this podcast, you don't think of us that way, right? We're doing this because we like this and because we want to get better at it and we want to share what we've learned and learn from other people. But it's just, I don't know. It's part of the name is it's kind of just funny, right?
Yeah.
1X Developer Podcast, like, that's just kind of funny.
It's a little self-deprecating. That's funny. I've never really thought of it that way, that we're okay with sucking.
Well, I've seen this a little bit, like, I can't think of any specific ones, but, like, on the Primogen's YouTube channel, he'll react to some article, and the article might be saying, like, why can't we work a 30-hour week, or, like, why are we expected to study all the time, or whatever? Why do people want me to use tools that I don't like, whatever? And the Primogen tends to be someone who's like, hey, look, if you want to get good at this, you're going to have to, like, work really hard, and that's something that you should be expected to do. He might be a little bit more gung-ho on that than I am, but, like, I think I mostly agree. Like, it is good to be really good at something. And if you're going to dedicate your career to something, you should try to get really good at it, whatever it is.
I think there's a separation needs to be made. First, the thing you were saying about accepting of people who want to work 40 hours and go home to their family. I think that there need to be allowances for that. People should be able to put their time in at work and go home and not be online,
right?
Not be checking emails, but also not be doing continuing education all the time. I just think that there are a lot of people who've chosen whatever career field, like software developer, plumber, electrician, right? Like, whatever you're doing, I think you should be able to put your time in at work, go home, and choose your priorities. Maybe your priority is your family, right? You're way more into being with your family and raising your family in a way that you think is right than you are about learning Rust.
Yeah.
I think that's important. For anyone who's interested in software development and, like, really getting better at it, I do think, I think that's kind of a different thing, I guess. If you're interested in it and you want to keep doing it as you want to keep advancing in your, not even in your career, but like in your knowledge of software development. That's kind of a different thing. And I think, first of all, I think that should be rewarded at work. I think that employers should look at that and be like, oh, this guy's going above and beyond and learning stuff in his free time. I think that's commendable. So I think those are kind of two different paths. Yeah.
It just seems kind of interesting sometimes that, like, I feel like a lot of professions you don't see that. Like, everyone's expected to do the best they can, but, like, it seems like I imagine the average electrician comes home and, you know, they might do electrical work if they have to, but, like, it's not, you know, they don't spend extra time trying to, like, push electrician work forward or contributing to open source electrician work projects, right?
Yeah.
And I just, I'm not saying that's a bad thing. It's just interesting.
I think part of that just has to do with how fast the field is moving and how new stuff is cropping up every day, right? I think we've learned most of what we're going to learn about electricity.
Yeah.
I don't think that there are a lot of new techniques and methods. I could be wrong about that. I don't know. But
well, I mean, like, so there's new electrical engineering problems and stuff. But yeah, like, as an electrician, you're working on homes. Yeah. And there's kind of a standard way of that homes are wired up.
I guess there's new codes and stuff like that you need to be up on.
Yeah, sure.
There is, you know, some continuing education stuff there. But yeah, I think in general, I think that push in software development specifically has to do with just the pace of the field and, you know, the fact that a college graduate who's coming out of school today versus a college graduate from 10 years ago, like, there's a really big difference in what is available in the tooling, in what was common and what's like considered best practices. I feel like best practices in software development are changing every day.
Oh yeah.
It's just this constant movement that you're expected to keep up on, just partly because of the youth of the field and how fast it's moving.
Yeah. And, you know, I have this thing where a lot of the time I feel like, first of all, I feel like I'm just not that good of a developer. Like, I have those feelings a lot of the time. And I also feel like there's so much going on. So many people are making so many cool things. And, like, I've never really made anything cool. Mm-hmm. And that's like part of why I wanted to do this podcast, you know? It's like, hey, I made something, you know? Mm-hmm. Do you ever feel that way? Or is that just a me thing?
No, absolutely. Yeah, I feel like that all the time. I've never had a open source project that blew up, or like I've never really even made like a major contribution to an open source project.
Yeah.
I think I'd even be happy with that, like just working on a project that I thought was important and meaningful like that. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I feel the same. I mean, I've made small contributions to open source projects, and I've made my own open source projects that no one's ever heard of.
Yeah. Same.
But yeah, I think a lot of the time I think, like, you know, my career, you know, am I like, I know I add value for like the business I work for and stuff, but I wonder, like, you know, is anybody going to like remember the code I wrote? That kind of thing.
Yeah.
That's kind of that's a podcast episode in itself, I guess.
I think so. I think that goes a little bit back to what we got into in the Is Programming Fun episode. We were talking a lot about, you know, career and stuff in there. And it was like, I think that stuff that you're talking about there is what makes programming fun, when you're really like working on something that is kind of yours and you own it. And I think that's a lot of what makes programming fun.
Okay. So let's talk a little bit about the study referenced by the Mythical Man Month. It's called Exploratory Experimental Studies Comparing Online and Offline Programming Performance by H. Sackman, W.J. Erickson, and E.E. Grant. And again, this was done in 1968. Is that what I said?
I think so.
So this is a long time ago. And one thing that I think is important to recognize, I think it's mentioned in the introduction, is that this type of study hadn't really been done much. You know, people weren't really looking at comparing productivity of programmers at that time.
Yeah.
I think if you needed to hire a programmer, you were like happy you got one in 1968.
Right. It wasn't as hot of a field with like every college in America offering one.
But I skimmed the study a little bit earlier, and I gotta say, I think that the conclusions they made about that led to like the proliferation of the TEDx developer, I think they're a little dubious. So first of all, how many? Well, so they did one study on experienced programmers and one on new trainee developers, they call them. So we can kind of throw out the trainee ones, right? Because that's not what the 10x developer idea is about. Right? It's about experienced developers.
And he says that in the Mythical Man Month, right? He says we're talking about experienced programmers.
Yeah. So they found a group of experienced programmers. How many do you think they got for their study?
I'm going to say 50.
They had 12.
Okay.
The study used 12 experienced programmers, average of 7 years experience. So right off rip, I don't think 12 is enough.
No, that's a pretty small sample size.
Right. And I don't think they mention anything about where they got these guys either. Right. Because I imagine 12 Google developers are going to perform a lot differently than 12 of me. So that's... I'm almost ready to throw the whole thing out right there, honestly.
Yeah. No, that does seems like a big asterisk.
Yeah. Then they go into a little bit about how the experiment worked. And to summarize, basically they had 6, and they did this for the experienced and the inexperienced, but just looking at the experienced group, they had 6 of them do this program that solves algebra equations. And they had 6 work on this maze pathfinding problem. And it goes into detail about the parameters of the maze and the algebra and stuff. But that to me also kind of raises some questions. I mean, so these results are based on an algebra program and a maze program. These don't sound like maybe in 1968 you were doing a lot of that, but I don't think your average JavaScript developer today is thinking about making a program that takes algebra equations and solves them.
Yeah.
Or doing pathfinding in a maze. That's LeetCode-esque stuff, right?
Yeah. Well, I think that's one of the big caveats to when going back to earlier when you were talking about what are the criteria we're talking about 10x what, right? Like 10 so you can I think there's a lot of very, very good programmers who, if you said implement a sort algorithm or whatever, they probably couldn't do it.
Yeah.
But they're very productive at their jobs. They just call dot sort on the array or whatever.
Exactly.
So there's some very low level stuff that a lot of people just don't even need to get into anymore and are very productive without needing to know all that stuff.
Well, and even, I mean, I've worked with people their title was software engineer and they didn't even code.
Yeah.
I would say those people probably aren't very good developers, but they seem to be effective in their jobs. And I think it's important to point out that at least this study is talking about raw programming skill, right? Lead code questions, how good are you at solving interview question type programming problems is effectively what this is asking.
What today would be considered interview questions,
Yeah. So that also, I mean, I'm sure there's a huge variation in that. Like if you look at a team of developers and you give them a problem, some programming challenge, LeetCode 153, whatever, and you'd probably see a pretty good variation of their ability to solve it, don't you think?
Oh, absolutely.
But I don't think that equates to good developer versus poor developer.
Right. I think, that's a very kind of specific thing, and I think it has very little bearing on... I think it has very little bearing on how productive they are in their job, and I also think it's leaving out a lot of really, really important skills, things like software architecture kind of stuff.
Oh, yeah.
Do your classes make sense? Are you just doing things that only you can understand because you've, code golfed everything into as small as it can get.
Well, and once again, like in 1968, like I don't think they had classes, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
So they didn't count, and so the way they measured it was based on the man hours it took the programmer to make the program, and the CPU time of the execution of the program.
Oh, interesting.
Which I imagine was probably a really big deal in 1968.
Yeah.
How fast your code was. I feel like a lot, if you measured that today, I mean, okay, the developer that chose Rust is going to do really good, and the developer that chose Python is going to do pretty bad, at least on the CPU time. The Python developer might get done faster. So depending on how you weight it, I guess. But it's just, these are metrics that are not good for talking about overall. And I mean, we're not even mentioning anything about like soft skills, gathering requirements.
Right.
So really, the 10x developer is really the 10x programmer, maybe. And that's even being kind of generous.
I think, yeah, even that. That's really, really interesting about CPU usage because, I've heard stories about I think my dad still used like punch cards and stuff.
Oh, yeah.
And it was like, you got one chance to compile your code in a day, right? You had to like reserve the computer lab, and you would take your punch cards down and you would run it through. And if you had an error and your code didn't compile, it's like, oh, well, I'm going to try again tomorrow.
Yeah. and they reference things like time sharing and stuff in the introduction. Stuff I don't even really know what they're talking about. So I think like 10x developer myth busted.
I think so. I don't think that it's fair to say there are 10x based on that study. I don't think it's fair to say there are 10x developers.
Yeah. There is a wide range of skill of developer, though, don't you think?
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that some people are wildly more productive. I don't think that's a myth. I think it has a lot more, kind of what you were saying about raw programming, though. I think it has, the people who are most productive are productive at creating code that, first of all, is usable by the team, not just by them, but they can create code that's understandable to people around them. And I think, honestly, that's kind of one of the reasons I like Python, is because I think it lets you do more of that. I think it lets you make code that's like, it encourages you not to do things that are complicated for the sake of it.
Yeah, and that's why some people don't like it, right? Because it doesn't give them the creativity that they want or whatever.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think that's what makes it one of the big things that makes it effective. It's readable, and there's generally like a right way to do it in Python.
You're kind of pushed down a certain way to do things. Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, it's interesting. I mean, well, so on that, I mean, like, have you ever worked with like one of those developers who like they do really cool, crazy stuff, but then it's like, I wish you weren't that cool. Like, you know what I mean?
I don't know if I really have that experience. I mean, I certainly can envision what you're talking about, but we've said on previous episodes, like the job that I'm at now is the only that we worked out together, is the only programming job I've had. And I don't think there's anyone on the team who does things like that.
Yeah.
Luckily.
I have seen it, and it makes you wonder, like, is this guy a 10x developer? Or is he, I mean, if nobody else can really figure out what he even did, it depends on the problem, I guess. I would say a really good developer also is someone who, because you mentioned like it's readable by the team and all that, but I think a lot of it is like an experienced developer who's really good is someone who can really get directly to the root of the problem.
Yeah.
Right. And they solve it in the simplest way. Because there's, a lot of the time you talk to the end user, and when you start to realize what it is that they actually want, right? Why they're asking you for the feature they're asking, a lot of the time the answer is pretty simple, actually. You can really, and usually it doesn't involve a whole lot of code. If you're really like at a high level, if you're a 10xer.
Yeah. No, I think that's 100% right. What do you think about this idea? The skills of talking to the user and documenting and figuring out what they actually want, and the skill of actually programming the solution should be separate. There should be different people in different roles doing that.
I don't think they should be different roles.
Yeah?
Because, I mean, the only reason why I say that is because then you have to have that one person talk to the developer, and every like chain in the game of telephone is an issue, right?
Like the guy in Office Space who takes the documents from the one department and gives them
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I do wonder if coding assistant chatbots get really good, do we, is that kind of the future we have, where your job is figuring out what we need and then telling the computer to make it?
Yeah. Becoming a programmer is more about interpreting the user's, like figuring out what the user's problem actually is, what they're actually asking for, and then now that you've gotten specific enough, just telling ChatGPT to write code for it.
Right.
Yeah.
Because in my experience, those are the things that ChatGPT is bad at, like reading between the lines, understanding what it is you're really trying to ask, right? Like you get good responses from your prompts when your prompt is very like, okay, I did this because I was trying to do this, and I did this because I was trying to do this, and I have this situation, and these are my knowns, these are my unknowns. Write this. That's when you get good results from it. And then you still have to proofread it once. But I think, maybe that's what the future looks like.
No, that's right. It's kind of interesting. Like, I'm drawing a blank on the names of the different kinds of errors, but there's there's a syntax error and your code won't compile, but then there's also like a logic error or whatever. Right. It's like your code runs, it just doesn't do what you actually want it to do. Yeah,
business logic messed up or whatever.
And I think that's kind of what you're talking about there, is like ChatGPT can write a program that compiles and is syntactically correct, no problem.
Yeah.
Does it actually do what I asked it to do flawlessly?
Or if you're using it to debug, if you give it your code and there's a syntax error, it will catch it like almost every time, right? Like if the issue is that you're missing a semicolon, like ChatGPT will tell you. But if your issue is that there's this mismatch between what you've written and what the ticket was asking for originally, that's like not, that's something that you have to like use your brain for.
How does it do with types, just out of curiosity? Is it able to say like, oh, you're returning a float here, but you actually wanted an int?
I don't know if I've used it for an example like that, but I feel like it would be good at it.
I feel like if compilers can understand types, there's probably enough examples out there that it's been trained on that would understand it.
It should, yeah. I mean, my experience with using ChatGPT and Claude and Find and those tools is that they're really good at answering like interview question type questions, right? Stuff like the algebra thing that those guys were asking for. Really good at problems like that where it's like clearly defined what you want. And it's pretty good at debugging if you give it all the context of everything. And I feel like there's another situation where they do pretty well. They're pretty good at like converting from one code to another code, like one language to another. But things much more complicated than those types of examples are where it starts to be less valuable, in my experience.
I'm just kind of thinking about this right now for the first time, really. But I think maybe one of the values in ChatGPT and stuff is revealing things that you didn't know. Like, if we're talking about those two problems that they were measuring that performance for, pathfinding has well-known algorithms now, A star and things like that. I'm sure algebraic solving algebraic equations has well-known, battle-tested algorithms for doing it. It's like, I kind of wonder if programming is going to become more of that kind of thing where it's like, maybe that's even the same thing. You describe the problem you're having and it says, oh, the algorithm you want is this.
Oh, yeah. That's the other thing, is that they are really good at optimizing and refactoring usually. Like if you give it a function and say, hey, can you make this faster? If there's a way to do it, it seems like it's pretty good at finding a way to do it.
Oh, that's interesting.
Or sometimes it'll use, it might use, this happens to me a lot where I'll write something and then I didn't realize that, there's a built-in function for that. And ChatGPT will use the built-in function instead of making extra crap.
Yeah.
So it's good for that. I think it's probably a pretty good learning tool if you're using it that way, That's what I've mostly used it for and I haven't gone beyond like kind of hello world stuff for the most part, but I've been trying to learn like GPU, OpenGL kind of stuff, and it's been pretty good for that. Yeah. Do you think it could make you a 10x developer?
I kind of think the bar gets raised when everybody can use it. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that's true.
Now, the 10x developer of yesterday is the 10x developer of today. Wait, I didn't say that right. But you know what I mean? Like, if everyone's using ChatGPT, the bar gets raised so much that the 10x developer is someone who, I guess, knows the language really well, knows how to craft their prompts really well, is maybe a thing. It becomes like a different set of skills to be a 10x developer.
But I mean, I know there's a lot of people online that are like pretty against LLMs for coding, and I mean, I haven't used like GitHub Copilot or whatever, but I've heard some people say that they used it for a little bit and then they stopped using it, and then they like realized, I can't write code anymore, like without that handicap. Kind of like, you ever try to type something without autocomplete, and you're like, I actually I only get vaguely near the letters I actually need to be.
Yeah, it's doing more.
It's something like that. I've heard some people claim that kind of happens to them, which is a little scary.
Why did they decide to stop using it?
I think because of that, actually.
Okay. Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know if I haven't tried it, so I can't really say that I'm against it necessarily, but I definitely see how that would be a problem. It does concern me a little. I just kind of see us sliding into this thing where code is written by ChatGPT or whatever, or by some LLM, and is not reviewed by anybody ever.
Yeah.
I think, if you use ChatGPT to write an email to your boss and it's just garbage and it doesn't make any sense, somebody's going to call you out on it. If you write some code, there's totally a chance that it could run for a year and it doesn't make a mistake until it does on January 1st. And then your accounting system fails or something, that concerns me a bit.
Well, and so here's the thing, that's already an issue, right? Because there are developers that are really bad. And
that's true.
Sometimes that developer is you even, you'll find code that you wrote that you're like, wow, this is actually terrible. Oh, yeah. The thing that's scary is if junior developers or just less skilled developers are using ChatGPT to be much more productive, but not necessarily better, that's scary, right? If they're just churning out more quantity of crappy code, that's actually really bad.
Yeah, no, that's really interesting. So that kind of goes back to criteria. What are we actually measuring? Do you feel like there are a lot of developers who are measured on just lines of code, just the amount of code they churn out?
Well, I don't know. I mean, that's something I wonder about a lot. What is the correct way to measure the effectiveness of a developer? Because I don't think lines of code is it.
Yeah.
But I do get the feeling that on agile teams, it's mostly number of tickets closed, right? Mm-hmm. And or story points completed, however you want to look at it. And junior developers tend to get smaller tickets, right? Like a lot of bug fixy type stuff.
Yeah.
So if you're like cranking out tickets crazy and you're approaching it with this very like short-sighted, little Band-Aid fixes all over the place, very quickly you've got this mess that ChatGPT can't fix for you. So that's scary.
Yeah. And to me, that's kind of part of what I was trying to get at with, like what really is a 10x developer. I think it's someone who short-sighted is exactly the right way to put it. I think a really good developer has a broad view. Well, in the book, he talks about there's kind of one person at the top of the team. This is in the surgical team part.
That's the point of the 10x developers. The 10x developers should be at that head of that hierarchy.
And everyone's supposed to be working for him, under him, assisting him to complete the task.
Yeah. So I think the answer to the question, that the problem of like people churning out bad code is just code reviews, I guess.
I think it's more hands involved in it, sure. Yeah. I think code reviews help. I think having... It makes me nervous. I will be honest. It makes me nervous at work when I'm the only person who looks at something.
Oh, yeah.
You know what I mean?
Oh, yeah.
When it's just a project that I wrote and then I deploy and no one else looks at it, that always makes me a little nervous. Even when I'm pretty confident in the code I write, I do wish we did more code reviews, I guess.
Or more testing, I guess. Oh, that's another one. You ask ChatGPT to like make a unit test for something, it'll do pretty good.
Really?
Yeah.
Any language?
I mean, the normal ones that I've used.
Wow.
So, I don't know how it. You probably have to tell it like with JavaScript, there's like a million different testing frameworks, so you probably got to tell it like, hey, use this.
Yeah.
But it seems pretty good.
We're talking a lot about LLMs. We were talking about doing an AI episode.
Yeah. Yeah.
Maybe that'll be something else. But yeah, I really think, I don't know that 10x, I don't know. Now that I'm thinking about it here, I feel like 10x developer is not necessarily a toxic concept, but I do think some of the things that go along with the developer, I don't know what you want to call it, the developer, the impression that people have of like a software developer is it gets a little dicey. Yeah, you are expected to be online all the time, and you're expected to be constantly like learning in your free time and things like that.
Well, and in episode 0, I talked a little bit about how I was like kind of hesitant to like get into computer science as a programmer. And I think that was a big part of it, was like I had this idea of who I had to be to do that.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, I'm not, this one note idea, which is so dumb because, working with different people, like there's all different kinds of people that are writing code, and, I've worked with older people, younger people, men, women, different backgrounds, different races, different religious backgrounds, everything. So it's weird. They pretty much all like video games, though, mostly.
Yeah.
At least have a passing interest in video games.
Yeah.
Which is software, right? So I guess that makes sense.
Well, and I think for people roughly our age, I think a lot of people got into software development because they were playing video games, enjoying themselves, and said, how do I make a video game?
Absolutely, yeah.
And
well, I mean, for me, it was more like I had a friend who was really into PC building, and he helped me build my first PC. And that was, I think, kind of the start of just getting interested in technology, of just like, working together with him, putting this thing together, and really kind of just wondering like, okay, so like, what does this piece do? What does that piece do? How do these, I think that was kind of the beginning of this 1X journey for me.
Did you connect that to your consoles that you were playing games on? Were you like, I wonder, oh, this console is really just a PC it has RAM and it has a video card and all that kind of stuff?
Definitely not at that time. I mean, I remember being very young and wondering like, how does a computer work? and always being really curious about that. And I remember in college taking like an assembly class, writing assembly, which I imagine most college kids aren't doing now, probably even at the time. But that to me was the moment of like, okay, I understand. I see, that was like the missing piece for me of like, okay, so where does the ones and zeros become this thing I see on my screen? Like the assembly was when I saw like, okay, put this in this register, address it. You know, that was when things started to really click for me. And yeah, I don't think I ever really thought about consoles in that. I mean, I knew they were computers, but I don't think I ever really thought about it much. At least not until I was older. I know, like, in more modern times, people do, like, I know people talk about, like, how many teraflops their Xbox has or whatever. I never really thought much about that, I guess.
I just think it's kind of... I never thought about it that way. I was into computers. I kind of knew what all the stuff inside the computer did, but consoles were still, like, just a magic box.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
I don't know why they always seem so different. And then I remember someone telling me one time, like, did you know PS4 is equivalent to like a 386 or whatever? And it was like, oh, right. If you dedicate all of your hardware to one specific function, you can really like maximize for a specific index or whatever.
Well, and I think part of it, like modern consoles now are more computery. Mm-hmm. You know, like they operate more like a computer. If you unplug your PS5 out of the wall and then you plug it back in, it'll complain that it didn't go down. It didn't do its shutdown sequence properly. Yeah. Which is something that like I never thought of when using like Super Nintendo. Right. Yeah. I just like ripped the cartridge out of there and threw it against the wall. You know what I mean? Like it was not. Yeah, that thing didn't feel like a computer. Right. You know, that was like a toy. It was like this, I don't know.
I think Nintendo in particular did a very good job of making it feel like a toy. Yeah, it was something you bought and played with. It wasn't something like I didn't know anyone who was taking their Nintendo apart to look at, what was going on in there. It was just a box that you shove your fucking cartridge in.
I mean, I know that like. I know from like YouTube, like from the Angry Video Game Nerd and stuff, that there was like the Nintendo Atari War, and they would like in the magazines and stuff, they would talk about how like this one's 16-bit with this or whatever, and this one's not, and whatever. You know, they would argue about like the components and stuff. So I guess people knew that at the time. Like people thought about it, but we didn't think about it.
Yeah. I want to go back real quick. What you were talking about there with your assembly class. Man, I feel like it was, back in episode 0, I was talking about, how I got into programming and stuff, and it was very kind of haphazard, and it wasn't, I wasn't doing tutorials and stuff back then. It was just like picking stuff up as I could find it, and I had a really fractured understanding of how all this stuff worked. And it wasn't until very late in the game that I made that connection between ones and zeros, and I think of it as like when software becomes hardware, right?
Yeah.
Or when hardware becomes software, however you want to think about it. It's like that's the moment where transistors turning on and off turns into like what they turn on and off, and then you make software. Like
it still feels like magic.
Yeah,
it always kind of feels like magic.
I wonder if without assembly, even without C, like I think you can really get there with some C. I wonder if that's going to be lost, though. I wonder if people really will not have a sense of how the physical world becomes software.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think we touched on it a little bit in the last episode. Yeah. People don't even think about their file systems. So,
don't think about memory even.
Yeah. I don't know. I mean, yeah, it seems like modern smartphones are like... It's almost like we've come back to the Super Nintendo, right? It's like this thing that I push a button and it turns on and it just kind of magically does everything I want it to do.
Yeah.
And then I don't even really reboot it almost ever. Like, it just kind of works all the time.
Yeah. And that's... I mean, I think that's kind of great. That's a great place to be. It was great to have my Nintendo work that way. I didn't want to be thinking about how much RAM it had and stuff. Like, it's great that we were able to think about it as kind of an opaque unit that did the thing I wanted, and we didn't have to mess with it too much. I just think that's kind of fascinating.
It is.
I think most software developers at some point get to the point where they're like, oh yeah, that's where the kind of the two worlds meet. That's how the physical world becomes software.
Yeah. You know, there's still a lot of weird stuff you don't even think about. Like, you know, the radio is mostly digital. You know, there's digital radios, like digital antenna. Like, so I bought one of those. In one of my apartments, I had one of those like bunny ear things that like stick to the wall for my TV.
Yeah.
And it had like I pulled up like a TV guide on there, and my friend was like, "How do you pull up a TV guide if it's just the antenna, right? Like, it's not cable. How do you do?" And I'm like, "Well, it's just data either way, whether it's through the sky or through a wire. It like they can send me the TV guide data. So someone somehow. It's just stuff you don't think about." You know?
Yeah.
Because it does feel kind of wrong, right? To open the TV guide on your antenna signal. Like, I don't know.
It feels okay to me. I don't know. Well, why does that feel wrong?
Because you do that on cable, and I guess you think of an antenna on a TV, and you think of like you think of a knob that goes like clunk, clunk, clunk.
Right.
I guess, you know. I guess that's all. Because it's the same thing like the radio in your car, you know, it'll display like the title of the song and stuff. And I remember the first time I saw that, I was like, how can it do that?
Right.
It transmits music. But data is just data, you know, really.
Right. Once it's digital, it's just, it's just ones and zeros. Just got to snatch it out of the air.
Yeah. I think that's it.
That's 55 minutes.
All right. 10X developer. Myth busted.
That's right. Yeah. Did we decide? Is it toxic? Is 10X developer toxic? I think I kind of changed my opinion during this episode.
Yeah, I kind of did too. It's not the worst thing in the world.
I mean, if the myth is busted, I guess we don't really need to decide if it's toxic because it's not a real thing.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. I don't believe in you, so you can't hurt me.
Right. Yeah. I don't believe in a 10X developer. I don't know. It's also not a bad thing to strive for greatness. Start at 1X, strive for 10X. Maybe you end up at like 3.
Yeah. I mean, you start below 1X, right? Like, 1X is like an average developer.
That's right. That's true.
So, or is it? Is the 1X like the poor developers?
Maybe that's what you were saying in the beginning. You're afraid people will think. No, I don't think 1X is poor. I think there are levels below 1X. Yeah. There are team members who drag down the team.
Right. Yeah, they do. They do. Yeah.
I think 1X is. Yeah,
that's the standard. Yeah,
that's the normal standard developer.
All right. So, whose side are you on? How do you pronounce the file type that is spelled GIF?
GIF, and I will die on this hill.
I also say GIF, and I've been in some actually pretty heated arguments about this.
People have strong opinions about this.
So the argument against GIF that I've usually seen is that apparently the original creator says GIF and feels adamantly that that's how it's always supposed to have been said. And that's how everyone should say it.
Too bad.
Well, and that's so. My argument is, I looked it up in the dictionary, and there are 2 pronunciations listed: GIF and GIF. And GIF is actually listed first, which at least in Merriam-Webster means that they're in order of preference, or at least occurrent, like how often they occur, right?
Yeah.
So it may be that GIF was the name, but if everyone, like language is like a flexible thing, right? It's almost like a philosophical argument, right? But like etymologists study this, right? That's like why we have dictionaries.
Yeah.
It's their job to like look at what people are saying and how they're saying it. And these experts say that GIF is correct. So I'm not saying GIF is incorrect. I think it's fine if you say that. But you cannot tell me I'm wrong when I say GIF. I feel very strongly about that.
My argument is the G is for graphics. Graphics interchange format. G with graphics with a hard G.
But here's the thing. Like, there's other initializations that break that rule.
What's an example?
Like JPEG. The P stands for photo.
Okay.
But you still say JPEG.
Okay. That's a good counter argument.
Or like I think like NASA. One of them is aeronautical, but we don't say NASA.
I do.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Part of the thing with GIF for me is that I never heard anyone in my life say GIF until like 2005 or something.
Same thing. Same here.
And all of a sudden it became this like hot topic about how to pronounce it. And I was like, what are you talking about?
Yeah, there's one way to say it. And I feel like people have tried to like gaslight me into like, oh, everyone says GIF. It's like, where are you from?
Yeah.
I've never heard that.
Oh, man. Yes, I'm glad we're on the same page and we can still be friends about this.
Well, while we're on pronouncing things, this one is less interesting, I guess. How do you spell the operating system Ubuntu?
I say Ubuntu.
I also say Ubuntu. I know there's some controversy around it. I think people say like Ubuntu versus Ubuntu. I don't even know what's right, honestly.
Yeah, I guess
I just say what I say.
I'm trying to think if I've ever actually heard anyone pronounce it. I'm sure I have at work, and everyone says Ubuntu.
Okay,
yeah.
Cool. I feel like there's some other things like that people no one knows how to pronounce.
Ubuntu? Does anyone say that?
Probably somebody does. But aren't there some others though? Like people argue about pronouncing. I mean, in tech.
Oh yeah. There's lots of them. I mean, SQL is one, right?
Oh yeah.
Some people will tell you that SQL is flat out wrong, and it's
really?
Always should be SQL.
Because I kind of use them interchangeably, and I thought both were cool with everybody.
I use them interchangeably too. I don't really have a strong preference, but I know there are some people out there who will say like, there's a reason it's spelled my in lowercase SQL, right? It's not MySQL. It's MySQL.
Who cares?
I remember that one specifically, I think when I was like going on a job interview or something, and I was like, oh, gotta make sure I pronounce it right, or else they're gonna think I'm an idiot.
Huh. Yeah, I've never even really thought about it.
No one's ever corrected you and said,
I don't think so.
SQL.
People say SQL, people say SQL. I just say both.
Okay.
It kind of depends on the sentence, I guess.
I usually feel like MySQL, or just SQL, kind of rolls off the tongue better.
MySQL. It does.
There's lots of them. We should have come up with more examples. But we can come back to that one.
There's some that I, like, usually it's some, like, library or something. I see the name and I'm just like, yeah, I don't know how people say that. This is how I'm saying it in my head. Oh, SUDO.
I say sudo.
So I used to say pseudo, which is pretty dumb because pseudo is like a word, right? Like PSEUDO.
Oh, right. Okay.
And that could be confusing to people. So I think I started saying sudo, but you don't really say that out loud much, do you?
No, you don't say that one out. At least I don't. I think it's sudo as in super user do this, right?
Oh.
Because there used to be, have you ever used SU, the command SU?
Yeah.
And so you elevate your privileges, so you're doing as SU.
Is that what it is, or is that just your headcanon?
Yeah,
It's super do.
that's just what I came up with in my head. I don't know if that's right.
No, it is. It's SU quotes do.
Yeah.
So I guess it officially is sudo.
Sudo. We're going to call that one correct.
Yeah. Okay. I've been owned. Another one. There are some people. The directory etc.
Oh.
Do you say etc?
Trying to think. I think I say Etsy.
I say Etsy too.
Is that wrong?
I think it's just different ways to say it. But like, someone once was like, "Dude, I work with this guy who says Etsy," and I'm like, "Yeah, that's how I've heard people say it." So awkward.
That one's almost more just like for convenience. I mean, what do you, if you're reading a sentence and you see etc, what do you say?
Well, if it's etc., I would say etc.
Right.
Yeah.
And so Etsy to me is short for etc.
But it's almost like just say etc.
I feel like it's wrong to say etc. when the directory name is etc. That's ambiguous. You know what I mean?
Because like I'll like the TMP, I'll call it temp or temporary.
That's true. I don't think there's any ambiguity if I say /temp.
Yeah, yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. If you say etc., I'm like, do you mean this directory etc. or do you mean etc.?
I mean, that one's not usually ambiguous. If you have a directory under root called etc., then I hate you.
Yeah.
But I say Etsy.
Okay.
I think there's a lot of Linux ones, but like most of the 2-letter ones, LSCP, I just say the letters.
Yeah, same.
I don't know. I don't try to make up words for them.
Oh, URL. You say URL?
Yeah.
I met a guy who said URL.
No.
Yeah. I say URL.
Canceled.
We're not saying URL.
No.
When he said it at first, I was like, dude, huh? You know? But I guess I get what you're doing there.
I don't know. I don't want to make too much fun. Like, I'm sure we all have blind spots. Some of these things, you just don't say them out loud all that often.
Yeah, and they weren't really designed to be said out loud.
Exactly, yeah. So there are some that they weren't really meant to be pronounced. They were meant to be typed quickly.
Yeah.
1X Developer Podcast.
Hey everybody, this is Collin. First and foremost, I want to thank you all for listening to this episode of the 1X Developer Podcast, and let you know that if you have any questions, comments, or if you just want to tell us about your day, you can reach us at X, formerly known as Twitter, at 1X Developer Podcast. We're also on YouTube at 1X Developer Podcast. You can email us if you're weird at 1xdeveloperpodcast@protonmail.com. And lastly, don't forget to follow, subscribe, all that stuff, so you don't miss any further episodes of the 1X Developer Podcast. Thanks so much. See you next time.